During the dark days of the Seventh Black Crusade, Abaddon the Despoiler once again marshaled his dread fleets out of the Eye of Terror to sow death and despair upon the Imperium of Man. It was only on the planet Makan that the forces of the Black Legion finally encountered a worthy foe. The Blood Angels of the Third Company, standing sentinel over the last of Makan's loyal hive cities, prepared to defend the remaining populace from a dreadful fate. Would the Sons of Sanguinius succeed in halting Abaddon's dark ritual? Or would the Despoiler bring wrath and ruin to those that dared defy him? Hi, I'm Ed and welcome to Minisodes. This time last year, Matthew from Miniscape joined me to relive the legendary battle for Macragge using our 2nd edition 40k armies. Well, this year we're doing it all again, but this time we're battling on the fringes of the Cadian Gate, where my Blood Angels are preparing to meet the forces of Matthew's Black Legion head-on. Let's take a look at our forces. My army commander is a Codicea armed with a force axe and clad in tactical dreadnought armor. He is flanked by 5 brethren of the First Company, including one armed with the formidable assault cannon. 10 tactical marines from the Third Company make up the backbone of this force. Their sergeant is armed with a bolt pistol and chainsword. The squad is also packing a flamer and a missile launcher. Performing reconnaissance are 5 scouts seconded to the Third Company, armed with bolt pistols, close combat weapons, and a heavy bolter. The presence of arch traitors on Makan was too much for 5 Space Marines, who now find themselves newly inducted into the Death Company. They are all armed with bolt guns, bolt pistols, and chainswords. In support, Ancient Brother Furioso towers over his brothers, ably attended by the mechanical know-how of a Tech Marine. The Dreadnought has the Ablative Armor Wargear card. And finally, with a roar of grav engines, is my Land Speeder, armed with a heavy flamer and multi-melter. Let's take a look at Matthew's army.
I decided early on that the core of my army was going to be Black Legion, if for no other reason than I could have Abaddon lead them. Accompanying him was a bodyguard of 4 Chaos Terminators. One armed with a Reaper autocannon and chain axe, another with a combi melter and power mace, a third with a combi bolter and power fist, and a fourth with combi flamer and chain axe. The other character I took was a Sorcerer Champion, a level 2 Psyker with a Mark of Tzeentch, plasma pistol, force rod, and displacer field. To fill out the core of my army was a squad of 5 Chaos Space Marines, 3 armed with bolters, 1 with an autocannon, and 1 with a missile launcher. Then there was a squad of 7 Plague Marines, 1 armed with a melter gun, the rest with bolters and plague knives. In support I had Mr. Tickle, a Chaos Dreadnought armed with a power scourge, twin autocannon, and assault launchers. It's painted Night Lords rather than Black Legion, because I think it looks cool. Also, I think it's totally reasonable that Abaddon would bring a range of Chaos followers into his fold. Finally, I have a unit of Plague Bearers, Lesser Demons of Nurgle. And that is my 1500 point Chaos Space Marine army.
This board represents the outskirts of Makan Primus. A line of hastily erected defences is all that stands before the sprawling populace beyond. Matthew deployed his forces first, placing the Chaos Space Marine squad with heavy weapons on a cargo container, giving them a commanding view over their advancing brethren. On his left flank, he deployed his Plague Marines, confident that their supremely rotten forms would protect them from Blood Angel fire. And standing just behind them was Sindri, Matthew's sorcerer. In the center, Matthew set up his Chaos Terminator bodyguard, along with Abaddon the Despoiler himself. And finally, shoring up his right flank, came the Chaos Dreadnought. In response, I deployed my thin red line of Blood Angels. I started with my combat squad armed with a flamer on my right flank, primed for a counterattack when the time was right. Further along towards my center, the second half of the tactical squad dug in with their missile launcher, alongside Venerable Brother Furiosa and the Tech Marine. On my left, just off the main highway, the Terminators and the Codicia stood ready, keeping a watchful eye over their Death Company brothers as the land speeder flew overhead. Finally, the Blood Angel scouts infiltrated their way into a bunker and set up the heavy bolter to cover the dead ground in front of them and await the coming onslaught. I almost forgot to mention that the Blood Angels drew the Assassins mission, so they would be gunning for Matthew's characters, namely Abaddon and Sindri, whilst Matthew had Witch Hunt, so would be after my Codicia's head. We reasoned that this powerful Blood Angel Psyker was all that stood in the way of a horrifying dark ritual that Sindri wished to perform using the denizens of Macam Hive. The stage was set. Let battle commence. Securing the first turn, my land speeder skimmed up to an abandoned bunker, in readiness for a pop-up attack in the shooting phase. My Terminators and the Codicia stomped onto the highway, confident that their armor would provide ample protection against any incoming traitor fire. The Death Company surged out from their barricade, darting across the street into the shadow of another ruin. Venerable Brother Furiosa plodded forwards, followed by the Tech Marine. In the Dreadnought's wake came the combat squad with the flamer. With the Blood Angels movement phase over, it was time to pour some fire into Matthew's forces. First, my tactical squad with the missile launcher loosed a crack missile into Matthew's Havocs, scoring a hit and blasting the traitor armed with an autocannon to pieces. The advancing combat squad snapped off a couple of shots at the Plague Marines, but despite their accuracy, they failed to harm their cadaverous forms. In the center, my Terminator armed with the assault cannon targeted the hulking forms of Abaddon's bodyguard moving down the highway. But sadly, his stream of munitions failed to find their mark. Furiosa spat molten death from his multi-melter at the Plague Marines, but clearly the Tech Marine still hadn't finished calibrating the targeter, as the shot not only missed, but went very wide of the mark. The shooting phase continued to go poorly as the land speeder fired its multi-melter at the Havocs, again missing on a 1 and scattering off target. Embarrassed and frustrated, the pilot popped himself off the mug and back into safety. Drat. I almost forgot about my scouts. They opened up with the heavy bolter, chug 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 chug, and had much better luck, reducing one of the Plague Marines to putrid chunks of meat and rotten power armor. In the psychic phase, my Codicia cast the Quickening on the assault cannon wielding Terminator, which Matthew failed to nullify, and in turn he cast Scan on my Codicia. In Matthew's turn, his Dreadnought stubbornly refused to do anything at all, the cantankerous old brute, whilst Abaddon and his bodyguard moved up the highway into cover behind some barricades. The Havocs repositioned themselves on the cargo container, mainly to restore coherency after the death of the autocannon Havoc. The Plague Marines, shrouded by a miasma of foulness, moved up amongst the barrels and construction equipment, followed by Sindri. In Matthew's shooting phase, his Havoc missile launcher retorted, sending a missile into my tactical squad, but the crack missile crashed harmlessly into some rubble. Another Havoc snapped off some bolter rounds into the Death Company, but they were too obscured by the ruins to come to any harm. The Chaos Terminators and Abaddon fired a volley of bolter and Reaper autocannon shells at the Blood Angel Terminators, but they either missed or failed to penetrate their tactical Dreadnought armor. The Plague Marines opened fire on the dug-in tactical squad and succeeded in blasting the head off a Blood Angel that was peering out to take another shot. A kill for the Plague Father! This went into Matthew's summoning pool as the skein of reality started to grow thinner. The second unit of Plague Marines failed to score any hits, but they did throw a blight grenade into the ground in front of them, intent on hampering any attempt made on their position. The psychic phase passed without incident. Caring naught for the effects of the blight grenade, Furiosa continued his march up the field, followed by the Tech Marine and the combat squad with the Flamer. A brother sergeant filled in the gap made by the fallen Tactical Marine, whilst the Death Company ran past the Land Speeder, intent on closing with the Havocs as quickly as possible, and straight into Matthew's booby traps.
Right, game over. Can't find the traps. Oh, there it is. I found it.
You found it! A chain reaction of explosions were triggered, engulfing the Speeder and the Death Company. But I got off lightly, with 2 Death Company mortally wounded. Breathing a sigh of relief, the Land Speeder moved up, intent on bringing its Flamer and Multi-Melter to bear on Abaddon and his bodyguard. My Terminators and Cadicia continued on their way, eager to close with the hated Despoiler and his retinue. In my shooting phase, the Scout Heavy Bolter opened up once again, and despite jamming, claimed another Plague Marine as he lurked around a column. The combat squad fired at the same unit and killed another of the abominations. The tactical squad did likewise, rapid firing and sending a crack missile into the fly-shrouded Plague Marines, their supernatural resilience proving no match for the Blood Angel's blessed weaponry. Furiosa brought his targeting reticule down on the last Plague Marine, reducing him to a foul puff of superheated steam with a shot of his multi-melter. This was more like it. The Terminators continued firing at their Black Legion counterparts, but even with the quickening on the assault cannon, failed to do anything, except jam the Cadicia's Storm Bolter. Now for my Land Speeder, which unleashed a gout of promethium over the traitors, setting 2 aflame. Then came the Multi-Melter, which hit and wounded Abaddon himself. Now for the armor save. Oh no, double ones! We then rolled for damage. Oh dear, Abaddon. You should have accepted the aid of the Chaos Gods after all. The death of such an exalted commander led to a break test on the Chaos Terminators. So Matthew played his second strategy card, Insane Courage. And again, nothing of note happened in the psychic phase. Could Matthew turn the tables in his second turn? Matthew began by seeing if he could placate his dreadnought into doing something. The Terminators, 2 of whom continued to burn, stormed forwards, eager to avenge their dark master. Sindri, bereft of his putrescent fellows, fell in behind them. The Chaos Dreadnought elected to get involved and brought its massive frame within view of my Land Speeder. I had a feeling that the Speeder would be the object of the ire and fury of Matthew's whole force and would not be long for this world. I was right. The Dreadnought's twin autocannons opened up, re-rolling to jam and smashing the skimmer and crew to pieces with massive explosive rounds. The Land Speeder crashed and burned, narrowly avoiding the Death Company Marines in the process. More sacrifices for the Dark Gods! The Havocs fired at the advancing Death Company and succeeded in mortally wounding another warrior, and also dumping a ball of plasma into their midst. The Chaos Terminators unleashed a stream of invective, bolt shells and Reaper autocannon shots at the Blood Angels, who stood aloof in their armor as the Reaper autocannon suffered a jam. In the psychic phase, reality ripped apart in front of the Death Company Marines, revealing the putrid forms of 5 Plague Bearers, perhaps the resurrected forms of the most favored of the fallen Plague Marines. In my third turn, there was nothing for it but to charge these foul demons with the Death Company. In fact, because they don't have a chaplain with them, I had no choice. Only 2 of them made it into combat this turn. Ancient Furiosa changed course and pushed the flank of the Chaos Terminators. The Tech Marine, less enthused by this prospect, hid behind a column. The combat squad moved up in support, whilst the Terminators formed a firing line. Furiosa fired his multi-melter into the sides of the Chaos Terminators, but again missed and scattered the shot harmlessly to one side. The assault cannon, despite quickening and hitting this time, failed to do any damage against the Chaos Terminator's accursed plate, and neither did the Stormbolter fire of his brethren. The crack missile from the tactical squad also missed. In the close combat phase, one of my Death Company Marines fell to a Plague Sword, whilst the other failed to slay the demon thanks to its invulnerable save. At the end of the combat, the rest of the Marines fell into the melee. In the Psychic phase, my Codicea attempted to cast Storm of Wrath, but Matthew's Sorcerer successfully nullified it. Matthew began his turn by moving all of his Plague Bearers into combat, who were also joined by Sindri. Oh, and if you're interested, the Plasma Blast fizzled out. The Chaos Dreadnought moved down the road, hunting for more things to kill, whilst the Havocs repositioned themselves. The Chaos Terminators, some of them still on fire, turned to face the looming threat of Furiosa. In the shooting phase, a Terminator vented burning fuel on my Tech Marine behind the pillar, setting him ablaze, whilst another fired at the combat squad, hitting a tactical Marine but failing to wound. The Havocs sent a crack missile into Furiosa, hitting the Dreadnought but failing to penetrate its hull. In close combat, Sindri dispatched his frothing opponent, whilst the Plague Bearers easily cut down the remaining Death Company. Turns out the Plague Bearers are incredibly nasty up close, and also good at close combat. Sindri heroically made his follow-up move back into cover, whilst his Plague Bearers shambled forth over the rapidly decomposing forms of my Death Company. At the beginning of my fourth turn, the flames overwhelmed my poor Tech Marine. With an avenging bellow, Furiosa barreled into the Chaos Terminators, whilst my Terminators and the Codicea moved forward again up the highway, this time to target the demons that had joined the battlefield, reasoning that at least their weapons would do more damage against them than their traitor kin. The combat squad moved deeper into the ruins, keeping their distance from the lethal combat ensuing ahead of them. At that moment, Hive Macken's defenses went online, sending a huge artillery shell plummeting down into the traitor lines, doing nothing. My missile launcher Marine, seeing the Chaos Dreadnought lumbering down the road, fired another crack missile. I played my second strategy card here, Crack Shot, and penetrated the machine's armor easily.
The Dreadnought's engine bursts into flames and the machine is immobilized. The Chaos Space Marine may use emergency controls to fire one weapon. Roll a d6 at the beginning of each player's turn. The machine explodes on a 1 or a 2. Any models within 3 inches suffer d6 strength 10 hits with a minus save throw modifier. Craggy.
The Terminators split their fire, shooting what they could see, dispatching a Plague Bearer back into oblivion, and finally overcoming a Chaos Terminator's armor. In close combat, the Dreadnought struck his opponents, but failed to wound them, damn that Terminator plate, and received no damage in return. In the Psychic phase, Sindri suffered a demonic attack, but banished his Neverborn assailant without a second glance. At the beginning of Matthew's fourth turn, his Dreadnought suffered no ill effects from his burning engine. His brothers otherwise engaged with the Blood Angel Dreadnought, the Reaper Autocannon Marine repositioned himself for a final furious burst, whilst Sindri ran out of cover to attack the Codicea and the Terminators. The Plague Bearers fell in behind him for moral support, if nothing else. The Reaper autocannon fired a deluge of shells, but failed to harm his targets. Terminators are so tough in 2nd edition, and likewise so did the Havocs. Matthew's Chaos Dreadnought poured autocannon shots into my Dreadnought, narrowly avoiding his Terminators already in combat. One of them penetrated the multi-melter arm, but I played my War Gear card Ablative Armor to negate the shot. In the final close combat phase of the game, Furiosa tore one of his assailants apart with his power fist. Whilst distracted, the second Terminator managed to ruin Furiosa's engine, burying his chain axe into the Venerable Brother's workings. In the final psychic phase, Matthew used Ultimate Force and cast Pink Fire of Tzeentch, obliterating one of the Blood Angel Terminators that stood before him. And with that, the Black Legion's assault on Hive Macon was over. At the end of the game, the Blood Angels had achieved their objective of killing a character, as well as inflicting a grievous tally on the assaulting Black Legion forces. The Codicia was also still kicking. Hive Macon was safe, for now. A huge thank you to Matthew for rolling dice for the second time on this channel. Be sure to check out the links to Miniscape, which has just passed 15,000 subscribers, and Matthew's hobby Instagram in the video description. Before I go, I want to thank my latest patrons for supporting me outside of YouTube. A big shout out to Drisden Dean, Apocalypse Somwen, Iril, The Iron Snake 89, Battle Brothers, Zachary, and Brian. Thanks for watching, and happy hobbying. Shall we have a pause and a brew?